Hey everybody, what is going on, and welcome back to another Trans Am video. Any of you guys who are new to the channel and have just discovered this video, click on the link at the top of the screen. That's going to bring you to the previous two videos in this Trans Am project series. So if you want to get caught up, definitely go check that out. But right away, I am getting to work here, ripping this old 90s cassette deck out of here. One of you guys left a comment on one of the previous videos mentioning that aftermarket head units with these cars can sometimes cause the gauge fuse to repeatedly blow, and that's the problem I'm having with trying to troubleshoot the gauges. I pop a fuse in there, it'll work for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, all the gauges will work, and then the fuse will just pop. So I just went in here, pulled that head unit out, and I'm going to put a new fuse for the gauges in, and then we're going to see if it actually can go a few days without blowing, and then I'll know the radio was actually the problem. But with that all disconnected, I'm just going under here to pop a fuse back in, and if you look at the volt gauge right above the gas gauge there, you'll see that come to life right when I put the fuse in. So all the gauges, as I mentioned, are working. You see the tack comes up, and they'll work like this for a while, maybe an hour, sometimes less, and then the fuse just pops. So you can see I'm revving it up. Tack is working just fine. Everything seems to be all right for now, but I'm going to drive this for a few days, and we'll check back in and see whether or not the fuse actually blows again. But now that the fuse is replaced, the first thing I want to address is the oil pressure gauge. I'm going to go in here and pull the sender out and hook up a mechanical sending unit, just because when the car warms up, the oil pressure goes down to pretty much zero. For the most part, when it's cold, it's reading pretty good. It's around 40, and then after it's fully warmed up, it's pretty much in the red at zero. But when you rev the engine up, the oil pressure comes up to like 30, and when dealing with an engine this old with a crap ton of miles, chances are that it could be a bearing problem where the oil pressure just isn't getting up to the rockers because the clearances are just way too big. Then when you rev it up, the oil makes its way up there to the sender and gives you oil pressure. So pulling this out and putting on a mechanical gauge when the electric one is reading zero will tell us right away whether or not it's the engine or just the sender that's the problem. So here's what the gauge is doing. You can see when it's fully warmed up, as I rev it, it comes up to about 30, but at idle, it just sits right there in the red. So I'm just going to come in here now. We're going to hook up our mechanical gauge, start the thing up. As you can see, it was fully warmed up. I took that recording right before I disconnected the sender, so we know it's reading zero. So if this mechanical gauge here reads zero as well, unfortunately we have a problem with the engine. But with the gauge all connected, we are ready to go ahead and start it up, and right away you can see we have way more than 0 psi of oil pressure. We're pretty much sitting right under 60. The needle is bouncing around a little bit, but the idle is kind of all out of whack. You can hear it's not running perfectly smooth, so I think that's why the needle's bouncing around. When I actually rev it up, it smooths out and the oil pressure does increase. So this thing seems to be very healthy oil pressure wise. As you can see, my oil pressure gauge there is period correct as well, like my timing gun. This thing's probably as old, if not older, than the car. But you can see as I rev it up, the needle smooths out pretty good. It responds very quickly to engine RPM, flips to the throttle. So fortunately, the engine seems to be alright. We just have to go ahead and replace that electronic sender for the gauge. But I'm going to put that sender on the list of parts that need to be ordered. Right now, we're going to go tackle these hatch struts, which if you guys saw my Tuesday video, I mentioned that they completely suck. They don't work. They don't lift the hatch up. You'll see in a second. But everything I'm doing here is pretty much a complete waste of time. But as far as replacing these, it's extremely simple. At the bottom here, you have this one Torx bolt, and then towards the top by the glass, there's this 8mm screw that kind of holds it onto this clip, and then you just remove the wires if you have your defrost, and then they come right out. Don't forget, this glass is very, very heavy. I completely forgot how heavy this thing is. It's been a while since I changed the ones in my Camaro, so make sure that's secure before you go pulling these things off. But after replacing them, you can see here by the goofy, confused-ass look on my face, they suck. They do not lift the hatch up. So I think they may have sent me ones that weren't meant for a spoiler car. I don't know. I have better ones that we're going to be putting in later on, so hopefully that is going to solve the problem. But before I get this thing up in the air and we start checking everything out, I want to go ahead and take care of this ugly ass air cleaner. The filter alone is really clogged. I don't like the chrome. It's all rusted and just gross looking. I mean, I know the car is in absolutely no shape to like this air cleaner or not. I mean, everything else is total crap anyway, but it kind of fits loose and it's just gross looking. I have the factory one in the back, so we're going to throw that on. But before I do that, I figured why don't we go ahead and rev this thing and see if there's any noticeable difference in like intake noise between this aftermarket breather or the factory one with a little snorkel on it. we got a few revs in there, so let's go pull this thing off and get the factory one on. I did go and pick up a factory replacement air filter. You can see what I mean with this one. I mean, the filter is just brown. It looks like it got wet at some point. The mesh is all rusted. It just looks like total crap. I mean, the rest of the car does as well, but hopefully this will help it breathe a little bit better. Plus we have the factory one in the back. Why not throw it on? Maybe it'll help a little bit, letting some cold air get to the engine, being it has that snorkel. But you see here, it just drops right on the aftermarket Holley. I was surprised because from some stuff I was seeing online with this particular spreadboard Holley, the factory air cleaner wasn't going to fit. But it fit on there without a problem. I got the lid on there with our fresh filter. And once the snorkel is in, I just zipped a couple of self-tapping screws in the factory location, and we were ready to start it up again and give it some more revs. So as you can see, obviously the open element aftermarket air cleaner has a much deeper and throatier tone because it's not as muffled like the factory one. So why don't we just come in here and flip the lid and let's see if we get the best of both worlds. So yeah, out of all three, obviously the aftermarket one sounds best, I guess. But I think the best way to put it is dealing with this car right now, whether a fart is loud or quiet, it's still a fart. But enough messing around, let's finally get this thing in the air, set it on jack stands, and see what that undercarriage looks like. Hopefully the floors are in good shape because those T-tops have probably been leaking for a while because the interior stinks so bad. So hopefully it's not Flintstone status under there. But I put the front end on ramps and the back on jack stands, and I started over here on the rockers, and I couldn't believe the fact that the pinch weld is actually intact on this thing because just like the dashboards, this is one of those things that's always messed up on these cars. People usually jack them up at that point and just completely crush the fender in the bottom of the car. But I mean, looking under here, there's really no surprises. The floors are solid, there's no rust. It has a new cat on it. I mean, the only thing that's out of place is it has these beautiful, beautiful wells on the catalytic converter. It also has the typical kind of 30-year-old car sludge that pretty much rust-proof the entire frame. You can see there the air hose for the cat and the air system is just pinched off, doing absolutely nothing. And then coming over here to the passenger rear wheel well, this thing is mint. There's no rust in here. On the Camaro, that kind of flange at the top there on the top right of the screen, it's kind of rotted out, so that has to be repaired. This thing has none of that. Wheel wells look solid, no rust in the spare tire area. Same thing for the driver's side, nice and solid, no signs of rust, which is a good thing because this thing needs some body work and it needs paint. So the fact that I don't have to go in here and start like putting patch panels underneath the car is definitely a huge relief. But now taking a look out back here, you can see that nice new Walker muffler. Axle's a little crusty, but that's pretty much to be expected. That brake line on there is going to be replaced when we get around to doing the rear brakes. But once again, really no rust. The hatch well is pretty much solid. The bottom of the spare tire area that I mentioned earlier, same thing, that's pretty solid. The other thing that kind of caught my eye and amazed me on this car is the rear bumper support on this thing has no rust. Once again, another common third gen thing. These things always rot out, and I actually might steal this one and put it on the Camaro just because the Camaro's is all rotted out and I have to replace it. But taking a look here at the brake lines and stuff, you can see right there at that bend where the jack stand is, there is some rust there. It's really not too bad though, and that's pretty much the worst of it aside from the line going across the axle. As for the lines running along the torque arm and up to the front of the car, they're pretty much solid, so I might just tap in right there at that bend and replace them from there to the axle. I'm not really sure yet. The brakes are fine so far. They don't seem thin enough like they're going to blow out, so I haven't gotten around to it yet, but that is definitely something that's going to need to be done once we start adding power to this thing. But seriously, for a 30-something-year-old car, the bottom of this thing is incredibly clean. I actually do have the aluminum 4th Gen drive shaft left over from the Camaro when I went to the chromoly one with the strange rear, so I'm going to throw that in there. That's going to be a free upgrade. I got to look through my parts bin, see what I have. I'm sure I have a bunch of Camaro stuff that I'll be able to just throw in this car and get a little performance upgrade out of it. But working our way up front, all the suspension is relatively tight. The only thing it's going to need is an idler arm. That's that piece right in the middle of the screen that kind of goes up by the fuel pump. That has some play, so we're going to get another one of them. They're pretty cheap. Throw it in there. Everything has grease fittings, so we can just come under here, grease the ball joints, grease the tie rods, maybe repack the wheel bearings, and then we should be good to go. And then another piece of 3rd Gen history that's somehow still connected to this car. It still has the air dam. Usually these things break off, people hit parking stumps and crap, they fall off, cars overheat. Common problem with 3rd Gen is if your car is overheating on the highway, chances are you do not have this air dam under there. This car runs incredibly cool on the highway. I actually think it needs a different thermostat because it actually loses heat when I'm on the highway. That's how cold it runs. And then finally taking a look at the steering box here, it's actually not leaking. Steering is incredibly tight, as I mentioned in a previous video, so I don't have to do anything with this, luckily. Usually these things are weeping really bad at this age. I don't know if it was replaced before. It definitely doesn't feel like an aftermarket when I'm driving it though, because the steering is dead straight with no slop. But finally, last thing to do is pull the wheels and take a look at these brakes. Now this does have drums on the back with discs in the front. This is all stock stuff. You can see the drum came off without a problem. I didn't even have to hit it with a hammer. And taking a look in here, as you can see, it looks like crap. The shoes are metal to metal. The wheel cylinder is just falling apart. The rubber for the boots is just deteriorated. The hardware looks like crap. The drum has a big mark where the metal to metal on the shoe is hitting. But luckily, all this stuff is cheap. We're going to be able to rebuild these back brakes for under $100. For any of you guys who may have missed my Tuesday video, I already have the parts to do this. Link is going to be at the top of the screen if you want to go check that out. Alright, so now let's jump back up to the front of the car. I'm going to get it on jack stands, get the ramps out of there. I jack these cars up this way just because the front end's really low, especially on the Camaro, so getting it on the ramps first and then jacking it up just makes it easier to get onto the cross member and get the jack stands under there. But now that we have the wheel off, you can see the calipers have been replaced before. They have new calipers, new brake hoses. The shocks have seen better days. They need to be replaced. You can see they're leaking a tiny bit there. And the rotors also appear to be relatively new. They're not too caked up with rust, but they definitely will need to be replaced. I mean, this thing has a bad vibration under hard braking, especially on the highway. You hit it hard, it kind of pulls to the left. Even though the calipers are new, the slider pins don't really seem to be greased up too well. So eventually we're going to come up here, we're going to replace the wheel bearings, the rotors, grease up the calipers, put some new pads on it regardless, even though they've already been replaced. As you can see, the rotors just have hot spots. That's probably where my vibration under braking is coming from. But the pads are new, they have plenty of meat on them, calipers are new, so I'm going to leave the fronts alone for now. We're going to take care of the back, being they are metal to metal and they do need to be replaced. But taking a look at the control arm bushings here, you can see they look pretty much like what you would expect for a 30-something-year-old bushing. I'm going to be putting the Delrin greasable bushings in here. I have those in Camaro. They're great. So you guys will see a tutorial on that, me pulling these out, pressing those guys out, getting the Delrin ones in there, getting them all greased up. And at the same time, we'll probably go ahead and do something with the springs. But while we're over here by this passenger front wheel, for this fender, I'm going to replace it. It's not worth trying to pop it out. As you can see, there's a pretty big rust hole right there at the bottom, as well as towards the back by the vent. So I'm just going to get a junkyard fender. We'll get some color match spray cans, spray it up. At least it'll be uniform. The whole car is going to need paint regardless. But if the fender is the same color as the rest of the car, it shouldn't look too bad. But as for everything under the hood, you can see this fan shroud is falling apart. Someone kind of put a piece of plastic in there to repair it. The radiator leaks right there at the little nipple for the overflow tank. It does have a brass radiator in it, so I don't know how old this thing is. But I'm going to get a reproduction radiator, throw it in there, and we'll get that fixed up. As for the battery tray, you can see that thing is pretty rotted out. Another common problem on these cars, I replaced this one on the Camaro. So if I can't grind this down, pour 15 it and save it, we'll have to drill through the spot welds and get that thing replaced as well. For the engine, the valve covers leak pretty bad. They actually do smoke and you can smell it through the car. I already have the gaskets for that. So we're going to tackle that in an upcoming video, but probably the next thing we're going to be doing under the hood is getting this thing cleaned up before we start working on it, because it's just really grimy and there's just a lot of dirt and leaves and crap. So we're going to do a full engine bay detailing on this piece of junk, get it as clean as we can, then we'll finally come in here, do the repairs, get the valve cover gaskets replaced, get rid of all this air stuff that isn't hooked up, do something with the radiator, maybe put an air cleaner on it, get rid of any unneeded hoses, do something about that gross looking overflow tank, and just kind of do some really cheap cleanup stuff, general maintenance, before we start to actually modify this thing and make some power. But as for performance mods, I am going to release a video probably on a Tuesday outlining what my plans are for this engine. One of you guys mentioned I should do that, and I thought that was a great idea, just to give you guys an outline and what I'm thinking, and maybe you could leave some comments, leave some opinions if you guys think I should do something a little bit differently. But that's going to be coming out in an upcoming video on a Tuesday, so look out for it. It should be out very soon. But hopping inside to the interior, a few of the things that need to be addressed up here. On the center console, the light there doesn't work, so I'm going to have to go in there, see if it has power, maybe replace the bulb. But overall, the thing's in great condition. And check this out for all you original 3rd gen guys that love this kind of thing. It has the flashlight still. I mean, this thing is usually always lost with these cars. I put some batteries in it and it actually works too. So I thought that was pretty cool that it still has this thing. These things alone go for like $100 on eBay. So the fact that it was still in there I thought was pretty amazing. But the radio pod here is completely destroyed. The rubber is just warped on the side. The mounting points for the radio are just completely gone. The thing's all broken. Hawks has these for sale for like, I think $80 or so. So I'm going to pick one of them up from them. For the center console, you can see it's kind of splitting and falling apart. I'm going to try to save it, see if I can re-glue this like rubber back on. But one of these used from Hawks is about $500, so I definitely don't want to have to go and get like a reproduction. I'm going to try to fix it myself. As for the doors over here, the plastic is cracked at the top by the window sweep. That's a common problem. Door locks don't really work. You press the button, they click, but nothing seems to happen, so I'm going to have to look into that. Door panels, overall, they're in really good shape. On the passenger one over here, we have like a couple of punctures in the material. I'm going to see if I can go in there and fix that, maybe with some glue, kind of get the material lined up and glue it back down to the cardboard, unless I can find some cheap ones used. As for the carpet, I did decide I'm just going to come in here, clean it, and hit it with some spray dye. The cheapest reproduction carpet I could find is like $200, so I spent that just on the seats. I don't really feel like having to buy a $200 carpet to throw on this thing. It's in great shape, it's just really faded. So I think by cleaning it and just hitting it with the spray dye should get it looking like new. A lot of you guys seem to be interested in seeing me do that and want to see how the spray dye comes out. So it should be a fun little project, seeing how that's going to turn out. But I don't want to end this video without making any progress, so what do you say we at least get the oil change? We got everything checked out. I know what parts need to be ordered, so while I'm under here, we'll just drain the oil, change the filter, and I think I'm just going to let the raw footage speak for itself here.
Well, it doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look very metallic-y. I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but there are just spark plug wires hanging all the way down here by the oil filter. So, yeah. And they're literally right next to the exhaust. Ah! That was scary. I think the demon just got released from the engine. Oh, that's just the wind! Ah! The entire tripod is just covered in oil now. That is fantastic. She's gonna be a smoker, that's for sure. I'm probably gonna be changing this oil like 2,000 miles. The 305 in my first ever 3rd gen started knocking before I could even get plates on the thing. The 350 in my current Camaro, after the 2.8 blew through a rod, I put a 350 small block in that thing, and the rings didn't seat, and the thing just blew oil and had terrible compression. And then this is my current 350, which I have absolutely no expectations for this thing. I'm surprised it didn't throw a rod yet. Alright, tight enough. Let's fill this thing up.
Alright, so I had to go grab this funnel that I needed for the Camaro just because all the hoses and crap that are on the top of this motor, getting a regular funnel into the fill hole just wasn't going to happen. I had such a hard time even just getting to the cap, but I filled it up, started it up, checked the level, it was all good to go. So then I went inside the car to figure out where those rattles were coming from. Also, that breather hose right there that you see isn't connected to the air cleaner. I'm aware of it, it just doesn't reach, so I left it off. You know, the whole configuration of this engine is going to be changed soon anyway, so I don't really care too much about it. Alright, so I pulled the instrument cluster out thinking there was going to be something in there that was rattling. What it turned out being was this plastic piece under the cluster. So the lower plastic kick panel under there isn't connected, it's in the back seat, so that plastic trim doesn't have any bolts in it, so it's just rattling around against the bracket. Then on the passenger side, the pillar here, the trim piece is rattling there. That's why a lot of you guys thought the license plate was making the noise, but it was actually that plastic piece there. And once I get the headliner in there, that should push against the trim, and that'll get rid of that rattle as well. Alright, so with that rattle being found finally, I think it's time to wrap this one up. We got a lot of stuff done. We got the oil change, we figured out why the oil pressure gauge isn't reading right, and we know the engine does have oil pressure. And then lastly, we got that cluster rattle taken care of, and we have an outline of what the car needs, like right away. So definitely we're going to have to address those rear brakes in an upcoming video, get the shoes changed out, wheel cylinders, address that crusty brake line back there, as well as pick up an idler arm and start cleaning out the interior. But next video coming up, we're going to be taking care of the transmission fluid. We're going to pull that pan down, replace the filter, get the fluid flushed out. I'm going to show you guys how I personally do my transmission flushes. We're also going to detail that engine bay, get all that grit and grime out of there, power wash the thing, get it nice and clean. We're going to try another set of hatch struts, as well as diagnose that speedometer and see if we get that working. Because once that speedo's working, and we get that new oil sender in there, that's also going to be in the next video, we'll have working gauges, because everything else seems to be working all right as far as the gauges go. But once again, if you want to support the channel, go ahead, grab a hoodie or a t-shirt. Link is going to be on the screen. The whole reason I picked this car up was primarily to give you guys more third-gen content. I've always loved these Firebirds, and I wanted to get one for a while, but the thing that really pushed me over the edge to actually picking one up and doing it is the fact that I have this YouTube channel, and I could do all these repairs and show you guys what it takes to bring one of these cars back to their former glory. So if you want to grab one of those, link is going to be on top of the screen. If you guys don't follow me on Instagram, link is going to be in the description below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.